let's start from the beginning. What is the hip joint? The hip joint, I invite you to take a moment now and just point to your hip. And if you've studied with me before, you know, it's not a trick question. It's just good for our awareness to make sure we're all talking about the same structure. Some people think their hip is here. Some people think their hip is here. I don't know where else you might think the hip is. Here. The hip is actually where your leg bone, your femur, fits into your pelvis. And the little cup at the side of the pelvis called the acetabulum. That's like the socket where the actual leg bone fits into. So we have a receptacle and we have a bone, and it goes into that receptacle, and that space where they meet, that is the actual hip joint. It's an empty space. So when we're talking about the hip today, I'm going to be referring to the movement of those two bones, your femur bone and your pelvis, and how we need to move those two bones in relation to each other to accomplish this movement called abduction of the hip. So what is abduction of the hip? Think of it as what needs to happen for your body to transfer weight from one leg to the other. So just to give you a demo sitting down, if I have both my feet in front of me like this together, then neither of my hips are abducted. They are in the center of my body. If I'm looking at my belly button, I have a straight line from my belly button into the middle of my 2 feet here. Abduction of the hip would be this. So now the center of my body is here where my drawstring is, but my leg is out to the side. This is my leg that's abducted. Now both my feet are together, so neither hip is abducted. I take my left leg out to the side, so it's pointing away from the midline of my body. That is now an abduction of the hip. So the way that I always remembered abduction was my anatomy teacher in first year university referred to it as being abducted by aliens. So your leg's getting taken away from you. So there's space between your leg and the midline of your body. Now we could also accomplish that by scooching my butt away from my leg. So you can move the pelvis, and now I have this leg that's crossed over my belly button, and my right leg is now abducted because I scooched my pelvis away from it. So this is true sitting down, and it's also true, please don't follow the camera. It's also true standing up. You can take your leg, move it away from the midline of your body. If you have a seam of your pants through the crotch, that's midline. This leg is now abducted. I can also shift my pelvis away from my right leg. Now, which hip is abducted? My right leg. This motion with my foot off the floor is what we'd call an open chain motion, because the end of my chain, my foot, is floating in space. It's open. But if my foot's on the floor, we call this a closed chain motion. And I can just shift my pelvis away from this leg. So it's still abducting, but now with the foot on the ground, the chain is closed, contact with the floor. When we're walking, the abduction that we're going to see happening in the hip is when you take a step out of your leg. And because the weight of the body needs to travel into the front leg, it's leaving the back leg. And we get the situation where now we have the back leg with the pelvis shifting away from it to get into the front leg, to get the weight forward so we can walk forward through space. The back leg is going to be the abducting leg. Now, there are a number of other things, a number of other body parts that need to coordinate with the hip in order for hip abduction to take place effectively when we're walking. But today we're really going to zoom in on your hip and not really worry too much about everything else, because one thing that I've noticed in working with bodies is a lot of the time, less is more. It's kind of fun as a game to see what happens if we just give the body one new movement input, how everything else or other things, maybe not everything else, but other things might reorganize too. So the game we're going to play today is, what if we give your body back the missing ingredient of abduction to a hip that can't abduct? How will it affect other parts of your body? And you can feel that out after this session.